Okay, hi guys, how you doing? I hope that you're all well. Thank you so much for joining me today. My name is Jacqueline Francis, and I have a special guest with me today. Her name is Seema. I'm so excited. Do you know what I mean? I really am excited to talk to you today. So, Seema, can you just give our viewers an idea of what you do? Just tell us a little bit about yourself.
Okay, so professionally, I'm a homeless caseworker for a local authority. I've been working for local authority settings for the last 15 years. And in that 15 years, I've come across hundreds of domestic violence, domestic abuse related cases, people who have become homeless as a result of domestic abuse. And through the years, I've kind of become more and more involved in safeguarding. I sit on safeguarding panels, and I sit on the panels where abusers, perpetrators of violence are due to be released from prison. More recently, in the last 5 years, and I think this is testament to how much more groups there are on social media, such as Facebook and various other platforms as well. I'm seeing an increase in the number of women from Asian communities coming forward and talking about domestic violence. And what it
Yeah.
made me realise is that it's not the same. The domestic abuse sort of cases that I see coming through on a day-to-day basis through a local authority as a homeless caseworker is very different to the type of domestic abuse that we're actually seeing with Asian families.
Right, right. Okay. So let's just start there then, because you're saying that it's totally different. Because I talk about domestic abuse, and I've written about it.
Mm.
I could talk about it all day long because I think it's one needs to educate, women, well, everybody, not just women, need to be educated about domestic abuse. But I am aware that in different cultures, um, I mean, one would say abuse is abuse, but what's the difference between the two?
Yeah, I mean, there is a massive difference. There is, you're always going to have a different spread of, say, for example, social status and wealth levels between all communities, whether you're Asian or otherwise. And the type of domestic abuse and the type of help that is needed on each sort of strata at that level is going to vary as well.
Mm.
Um, Culturally, what sets apart the abuse within Asian communities are the traditions, the culture, the spirituality that's attached to it,
Yeah.
the financial aspect of it as well. There are a lot of sort of people within the Asian community are entrepreneurs, business owners of themselves, so it opens up to a lot of sort of systemic and financial abuse as well.
Mm.
But what I'd like to do is sort of if we look at sort of each aspect individually, because it's quite multifaceted,
Yeah.
and I think it would be great to kind of educate our audience on each different type of abuse
Yeah.
in terms of how it differs within the Asian community.
Yeah.
So first and foremost, you've got the cultural aspect where Asian communities have traditionally always been very patriarchal, and there are very set roles. And while that is changing, there is still room for a lot more change. There are sort of very set, rules for men and women, and for example, the permissions for a teenage girl to go out and socialize and drink and have her own
Yeah.
freedoms can be limited in comparison to her male siblings, for example.
Mm.
So there are a lot of double standards there. There's a lot of gender inequality in terms of opportunities for education and opportunities for a woman to want to have career choices as well.
Mm.
Those patriarchal beliefs really encourage that a woman is there as a homemaker and there to kind of nurture the family per se. And those views are encouraged by the women themselves in our culture, and
Mm.
that doesn't help.
Mm.
So, we can't blame men for this level of thinking. It is a female driven issue. So it needs to be the elder female generation that actually say, well, you know what, we may have done it in our generation, but let's not make it acceptable for yours.
Mm.
Um,
Because
we
it
should.
will continue through the generations if nothing changes, isn't it?
It's learned behavior, isn't it? And it's what we're trading, it's then what we're told in our community of, oh, but that's just how things are, so you just have to put up with that. And my response to that is, no, you don't. Be the change. In certainly in my household and in many that I know, we have a very it's not patriarchy, it's not matriarchy, it's equality. So there's complete equal opportunities for both. And yes, we have passing arguments between, if my husband's going to wash up, then he expects me to fix the car. It's not going to happen. But yeah, there are sort of very, very clear divisions, and while that is changing, it still needs a lot more change. The other side of it is sort of the spiritual side, where you're almost, how can I put it, threatened by religious beliefs, and sort of made to believe that if you're going through an abusive relationship, it might be something to do with your karma. It could be something to do that, but your life, you might have done something that you deserve to be treated this way. And again, I call that belief out, that nobody deserves.
So who are the people that are saying that? Who are the people that are saying that it might be karma? Or
it generally tends to be the much elder generation who believe in karma and reincarnation, and believe in it in a kind of slightly manipulated way. If karma isn't about you've done something wrong, so you're going to suffer abuse in this life. And it shouldn't be perceived that way. It pains me to see that in Hinduism, certainly, that karma is perceived that way, and it is, and an abusive sympathizer or an abuser themselves will actually use those principles of karma and religion to control an individual in an abusive relationship. So that's some part of it. I have a very good friend of mine who recently sort of disclosed to me that she was regularly taken to a priest by her mother-in-law because of the issues between her and her husband. And it was she was consistently advised that it's something to do with your stars, it's something to do with your horoscope, it's something to do with your previous incarnation. You might have done something wrong in your previous life. It's that level of manipulation and belief of those spiritual beliefs that are being abused to control and have power over abuse. And that is a belief that I want to really firmly stamp out and say that, not just within Hinduism, but I don't think there is a single Asian religion, whether it's Islam, whether it's Buddhism, whether it's Hinduism, Sikhism, there is no religion that condones abuse and violence against women or against another. So when people are using those beliefs to manipulate and abuse another and have power and control over another, then we really need to make a stance against that and say no to that.
Absolutely. Yeah. So, and what are the other aspects you were talking about as well? What are the other?
So again, the whole sort of gender side of thing, this is still a problem in this country and also in India as well, where when a woman is pregnant or she has a girl child, there is still a stigma attached to having a girl in the family, to the point where in India the population is disproportionate. There are more men in the country than there are women. Because
behind it, then why is it for the boys and the girls?
So it's believed that the men are considered as being the heir to the family, and they are the individuals who will bring the family name forward. And the women don't get that, daughters don't get that level of recognition. It is perceived that a daughter is quite kind of, I know what I can think of it in my own language, but to translate it into English, it's almost like saying, you're only my property for a short period of time, and then I have to give you away to another family. And that is, you're just a gift in our family for a short period of time, and then we're going to hand you over. And so that whole belief system from the start makes you feel like you're somebody else's property and you're not your own person from the outset. So the kind of self-worth of a woman from her birth is almost sort of antagonized from the start.
Mm.
And so, and again, you know, if you're born to believe that you were never meant to be in this family and that you are just going to nurture somebody else's home, if that is the belief that you've been brought up with, then that is what you're going to believe is your sole duty and your sole purpose in life, when actually there is so much more to it.
Yeah, so what impact does that have on a young girl, especially if she's born here? You know, because they're living sort of like both life, you know, in your home, your, you know, the traditional culture and, you know, then the Western. How does a girl explain
I mean,
that?
interestingly enough, okay, during lockdown, I discovered TikTok.
Okay.
And what I found is that there are young girls. My son's 19 years old, and I've seen girls probably, you know, his age on TikTok, and they're uploading videos about, you know, things that suck about being an Asian person. And you know, they're all still saying the same things. They're all still talking about gender inequality. They're all still talking about, oh, it's not fair, we don't get to go out as much as our brothers, we don't, we're expected to learn how to cook and clean and domestically run a home. And yes, education has become an important thing for women, which is a great step in the right direction. But the freedoms and, you know, that sort of need to discover yourself and really kind of go out and be your own person, there is still a stigma attached to that. The effect that it has on a person's self-confidence and their sort of, you know, their general character building as a whole is immense, because you're always going to be made to feel like, you know, you just don't deserve as much as your sibling and your male siblings or your brothers. And so the impact is huge. Living in a dual sort of society where you've got your Asian traditions on one hand and still wanting to live a liberated Western life, and getting the balance between the two
That must be
is
difficult.
another that.
Yeah,
It is.
So during this lockdown period, and I know that you know, calls to the, you know, domestic abuse helpline has risen twofold, threefold, or whatever. What are you seeing then? What are the changes that are you seeing? Is there anything new? Is there a higher risk also within the Asian community?
Oh, definitely, definitely. And I think I have started working with members of sort of the Asian community, creating more awareness. And actually, the refreshing change that has come through is that more and more members of the Asian community are now standing up and listening to this problem of domestic abuse. So, and whether, again, I speak for all communities when I say this, it's not specifically a Hindu community thing. It is, you know, all communities are coming forward and saying, wow, this problem is getting worse, and you know, what can we do within our own communities to make this better? How can we help people from our own communities come forward and access support? So I think that has been a real kind of groundbreaking change that I've seen on that. So that's a positive thing, and I wanted to start on that positive note in terms of what we have seen in terms of positives from lockdown. The negatives, yes, you know, even within the Asian community, we have seen a massive rise in domestic violence and domestic abuse, you know, cases coming forward. I'm part of a social media group which consists of 60,000 Asian women. And we launched our own domestic awareness campaign on this group, where we basically, as an example, this isn't actually the code word that we use, but as an example, it was, you know, my favorite fruit, hashtag my favorite fruit, for example. Okay. So you can turn around and say, my favorite fruit is an apple, which means, you know what, I'm going through a bit of a hard time in my relationship and I just need someone to talk to. My favorite fruit is an orange could mean amber, which is basically saying, you know what, I'm really suffering and I need help. And my favorite fruit is strawberry, which is red. Represent that I'm in some sort of danger and I need to reach out to professional services. Please help me. Just through the campaign alone, the amount of people that came forward and started saying that because I'm now at home with my abusive partner, I am suffering domestic abuse to a point where I can no longer take it. We've
Mm.
seen women leave their partners during lockdown. We've seen women go into refuges. We've seen them seek legal advice. And we've seen them unfortunately stay in those situations, but try to cope with it differently, just cope with it better if they can.
Yeah, yeah.
So there has been a massive influx of people coming forward, but I also think that because we drove that awareness into this social media platform,
Mm.
um, it had a good impact. And for me, we talk about how many people report domestic abuse, and we
Mm.
know those figures are sort of disproportionate
Yes,
to reality.
absolutely. Yeah.
So when I see an increase in the number of people coming forward and reporting domestic abuse, it makes me happier, because I feel
Mm.
that that's the first step to them acknowledging that they are victims of abuse,
Yes,
but
yeah.
it's also the first step of them getting help.
Yeah, yeah.
I think
And I agree when you say that there is more awareness, and the Asian community are now talking about it, because I went to an event, I think it was sometime last year, to do with domestic abuse. I didn't even read it properly. I just saw that it was domestic abuse. So anyway, I went along, and it was an Asian community. I was the only Black person there, but I didn't even know until I was invited to come up on stage. But what I found was empowering was that you had these elderly, not even elderly, okay, maybe 50s and 60s, because I wouldn't consider myself elderly, and they were sharing their story, and
yeah,
they were nervous. They were very, very nervous. You can see some of them were really nervous, and that was the first time that they were sharing their story. But they felt that they had to share it. And there were men in the audience as well.
mm,
Set it up, and it was good for them to come up and say, "Well, look, this needs to stop." As an elder person, they're saying that it needs to stop as well. So yeah, I agree with you that yes, there are. It's great that more people in the Asian community are talking about it, because it needs
yeah,
to be talked about.
it does. It
Yeah,
does. Um,
absolutely.
I think something else that has come out interestingly, and it's something that I want to share about my own family, really,
Mm.
is the responsibility of men in the role of domestic violence awareness. Now, I live with two boys, my husband and my son, and my son's 19 at university. He's at that age where he's sort of considering relationships of his own,
Mm.
and bring himself, and he's building his own character and everything. And because he knows about some of the horrific cases I've dealt with, he's often heard me sort of on the phone talking to people outside of working hours about their stories, and asking for help.
Mm.
Um, and, their understanding of domestic abuse is amazing, because of the
Mm.
work that they've seen their sort of mum, and in my husband's case, his wife, doing.
Mm.
But
Mm.
now they're actually willing and confident to talk about the subject as well.
Mm.
And I
Mm.
think that that is really important. Now, we know that domestic violence happens to men and it happens to women too.
Yeah, of course,
But
yeah.
let's face it, the figures are clear that the violence against women and girls is disproportionately higher than it is against men.
Absolutely, yeah.
But in both, in the context of both, it's so important that men talk about domestic abuse amongst themselves as a
Mm.
group, with their families, and the same level of discussions that we have as a family. I want to see other families have those discussions.
Mm.
Um, Domestic violence is not just a female issue; it's a man's issue as well.
Absolutely. But before you go on, I wanted to know, how do you educate? Because I mean, I know that I've gone to a couple of groups where there are young people, and a lot of young people think that domestic abuse is just physical. And for me to say, well, look, no, it isn't, and tell them, explain to them that there are other types of abuse. What is your understanding of your experience of domestic abuse with the Asian
So
community?
for me, I think that the easiest way to educate any individual of any level is to give them real life experiences.
Yeah.
Or, I mean, of course, I maintain confidentiality with all of my cases.
Mm.
Um, However, what I will say is, I'm not afraid to sort of talk about different examples of abuse. Like if I've spoken to a case and they have they've specifically told me about systemic or financial abuse,
mm,
then we'll talk about that in the context of, say, for example, access to money,
mm,
or access to being able to work, um,
mm,
access to services such as medical services, um,
mm,
or even sort of counselling and psychotherapy services. And when a person is being held back from accessing those basic services that they're entitled to seek,
mm.
um, there was a woman today who said to me that if something happened to her children, she wouldn't even have enough money to get a cab and take them to hospital.
Right, right.
So
Yeah.
and there is a huge difference between sort of a husband and wife, or a couple, um, planning things financially and agreeing on terms, and one individual having power and control over another through finances, and
Mm,
giving the other person to basically live on peanuts. Uh,
yeah.
so the best way, and another example is gaslighting, where you make another person
Mm.
believe that that everything's in their own mind, and they begin to question their own sanity and their own judgment.
Yeah,
Uh,
can I just interrupt there, because I actually watched you on an interview. I can't remember the gentleman's name, but he wrote a book, uh,
yes.
and I think you mentioned gaslighting. And because I mean, I've written my book and I've put practically a chapter in my book about gaslighting, because it's not
Yeah.
talked about and people
Yeah.
don't know what it is. Do you know what I mean? So as much as we talk about the different types of abuse, gaslighting is one that is not talked
Yeah.
about.
Yeah.
Or
And I think when you look at gaslighting in the context of the Asian community, part of that, because it falls under that spiritual and cultural abuse, where you're being made to believe that there must be something wrong with you, and that is why you're suffering.
mm,
Um, and you begin to believe that. There's many women that I've spoken to, and they're kind of conditioned to believe that because they are a woman, or because they might have done something wrong in their previous life, or this is karma, you might have you somehow or another done something to bring this on yourself.
yeah,
That too is a form of gaslighting.
yeah,
And I think the only way that you're ever going to be able to shine light and educate people on that, is to call it out when you see it, as and when you see it. And even if you don't see it, I think the classic example I like to use is my husband and my son and I are often, if we're watching an Asian TV channel and we're watching a movie, and I'll laugh at the TV screen and say, that's gaslighting,
all
or
right,
oh my God, that's just emotional and psychological abuse. And like, Bollywood has a lot to answer for when it comes to domestic abuse, because actually a lot of the movies
mm,
display abusive behaviors within relationships.
yeah, yeah, yeah. I wanted to go back actually, because this is one that really gets under my skin. All the pressure seems to be on women, and as you
Yeah.
say, men. As you say, they're normally the perpetrators. How can we educate men to say, well, look, what you're doing is not right. You
Yeah.
need. How do we get a group of men to talk about this?
Yeah, and I think this is where like my husband and my son have are really wanting to kind of play an active role in that,
Yeah,
because they're not afraid to talk about domestic abuse in a public setting.
yeah,
If my husband is out with his friends, and the subject comes up, he will, quite rightly so. And we need to, as men, we need to, if there is a misogynistic joke going around a group of friends talking about their wife being under their thumb, and
mm,
derogatory comments about how they look, or whatever their intimate life might be, or whatever,
yeah,
we need to be calling these individuals out and saying, hang on a second, mate, don't you think that's actually quite narcissistic? Don't you
mm,
think that your partner deserves to be treated better by you?
mm, mm, mm,
This is not a
yeah,
trait of a healthy relationship. So if the same way as women we would do that,
yeah, yeah, yeah.
then why is it so difficult for men to do the same?
But would it be difficult because, as you say, culturally, it goes, well, I mean, in any society, it goes way back anyway. But because culturally, the Asian community's values and morals are so strong, how easy or difficult will that be?
I think it's starting to break down those barriers now.
Mm,
And we have wonderful thing called social media now, which is great for sort of spreading those messages.
Yeah.
And I do feel that there is change coming. I'm very fortunate that certainly all of the men in my life, from my maternal family to my matrimonial family, are very, very supportive of the domestic awareness work that I do. And I think that the only way that we can penetrate that those patriarchal thought systems is to keep on talking about it within our communities, is to keep on talking about them on public platforms. We need to make discussions around, and I'm sure I've said this before, it's something that I say on every single one of my interviews. We need to talk about domestic abuse as simply and as easily as we do about fashion, about cooking, about news, about what's going on in the world. We are very, very good about talking about things that don't necessarily always affect us, but we pay an interest to it. But when you've got 1 in 4 women suffering with domestic abuse, or you've got 1 in 4 men suffering with domestic abuse, you do the maths. If you go out to a family get together and there's 30 of you there, how many people are likely to be impacted by domestic abuse?
Yeah, but it is a public health problem, to be perfectly honest.
Agree.
I wanted to ask, what is the difference, or is there a difference in abuse for those who are in arranged marriages? Well, we know forced marriage is abuse because it's against that person's will.
Yeah.
About that?
So in my experience, I had an arranged marriage myself, and I know people who have had not arranged marriages. They've chosen their own partners, and I think that the abuse happens irrespective of the way that the marriage was arranged. What I do think is that in both situations, it's still very, very difficult for a victim of abuse to come forward. And the reasons for that is, if it's an arranged marriage, there could potentially be 2 families where the relationships could be soured between 2 whole families and not just a couple. Particularly in certain Asian cultures where it's normal for people to marry their first cousins or their second cousins, or marry within their sort of communities or their cultures. The other side of it is, if you choose your own partner and you end up in a domestic abuse situation, then it becomes an embarrassment. And there is this general cultural embarrassment of a person being divorced or coming out of an abusive relationship, the stigma attached to that. So I think it's fair to say that there isn't much difference in terms of whether or not a person has an arranged or marriage or otherwise. But we do know that obviously honour-based violence and forced marriages are a form of abuse in their own right, and they're considered as domestic abuse in a different way as well.
Yeah, I think it's sad, and I'm sure many people would agree with me, when you see members of the family, the mother, the father, I've watched videos, I've heard people talking about it, where, this young girl, doesn't want to have an arranged marriage. She's met this westernized, guy, but the family's gonna go out and kill her.
Yeah.
It's so matter of fact.
Yeah, I want to talk about that because there was a recent incident where a photograph of a young Asian girl in her very early 20s was shared on social media, and it was basically like a missing persons type of profile. This was the photograph of this young girl was actually somebody in her graduation outfit. She had a graduation robe and hat on, so you could tell that she was fresh out of university, very young. And she, the family had reported her missing, and then this photo was circulated both on this social media group that I'm on, and every other person that I knew was circulating a photo of this. Now, the scary thing about what was being circulated was not the fact that this missing persons report was filed. There was no mention of saying, if you see this person, please contact the police because we have concerns about her because she might be vulnerable, or mental health issues or anything like that. It was a case of, if you see this person, call this mobile number, which belonged to another sort of Facebook group.
Yeah.
And my concern there is, and I speak for with my homeless person's hat on here,
Right.
where I have experience of moving people in and out of refuges as a result of being in danger and homeless and unable to return back home because of dangers of honor-based violence and domestic abuse. That if unless the police are sharing this image, so whether it's Metropolitan Police, Thames Valley, three, whatever, whatever constabulary it is that's managing it, we should not be sharing those images. Because
Right.
for all we know, that woman could be actually fleeing serious crime and serious
Absolutely.
violence from her family or her partner. Who
Mm.
knows what she's escaping from?
Mm.
And why are we sharing these images? When they haven't actually been shared by the police.
Right.
If more images that are shared by the police, okay,
Yeah.
and we have reason to believe this person is a danger to themselves or to others, fine, happy to share it. But
Mm.
if it's a woman who you can tell who's articulate and educated, and it doesn't point you back to contacting the police, it points back to phoning some random mobile number, we could be endangering that person even more.
Absolutely, absolutely, absolutely. I mean, I can talk about this subject for ages. We've actually, into 30 minutes as it is. But what the last thing that I really wanted to ask was about the homelessness. Are there enough refuges available for women, regardless whether they're Asian or not, fleeing abusive relationships? Are there enough places for them to go?
So the answer to that is probably no.
Right.
And I think that is the reason why we have the domestic violence bill being altered. What I would say is two things: that as far as the Asian community are concerned,
Mm.
there are specific specialist Asian women's refuges
Mm.
that specialize in women who want to be surrounded by people from their own culture. They
Right.
could be, the victims could be people who have no recourse to public funds and are from the Asian subcontinent with dependent visas. So these sort of Asian women's refuges are specialists in helping women like that or men like that. So
Mm.
it is useful to go into a refuge like that. On the
Right.
flip side, if it's a woman who was born in this country, she might
Mhm.
not want to go anywhere near an Asian women's refuge and would prefer to be in a mixed environment.
Yeah, of
So
course.
what I would say is if you are not getting a refuge space, then you should absolutely contact your local authority and
Mm.
speak to their homeless department so that they can assess you for eligibility to go into emergency accommodation if you
Mm.
are in danger. And
Yeah.
don't silence.
Yeah, because I mean, I know that's something that I'm looking to do because I remember I had this property, it was a few years back actually, and I had some really troublesome tenants, and I thought, I've had enough, so I actually contacted a refuge and said, oh, well, look, I've got this property, are you interested, to house women fleeing? And they said, well, no. And I'm like, oh, okay, so, but really, I mean, maybe
If
there
you
were.
have a homeless caseworker, I would be pouncing on that and saying, yes, I've got lots of
Exactly,
people.
and exactly, and that's what I thought. So, I mean, that was a few years ago. I mean, and that thought has now come back to me again because I talk about it, I've written about it, and I'll talk to anybody that will listen, in terms of creating this awareness and educating them. And that's, for me personally, that's a line I want to go down to acquire a property and for specifically for women fleeing domestic abuse. But obviously, I've got to research X, Y, and Z. So maybe we can have a conversation online.
Absolutely, absolutely. What I want to say to that also is for anyone who is watching and they are landlords who are interested in doing the type of work that you want to do, where they're specifically looking to pay it forward and use their resources to be able to kind of house someone who is vulnerable as a result of domestic abuse. Please remember that domestic abuse makes up 40% of homeless families. So that's a very, very large proportion of individuals who are homeless as a result of domestic abuse. Talk to your local authorities. People can be vetted before they were put into your properties, and all local authorities, will more than happily welcome landlords with their properties. And I'd like to think they'd provide you with the support as well. So. It is most definitely something that most local authorities would love to have from landlords.
Right. Oh, well, that's good to know. That's good to know. So, I mean, that's it really. Is there any last words that you might want to say to someone who may actually be watching, who may think that they're, you know, in an abusive relationship? Is there anything that you can say to them?
So speak out, and absolutely do not suffer in silence. There's one bit of nugget of information that I would like to share, which is specifically related to the things that we spoke about earlier, honor-based violence and forced marriages. A wonderful number of charities in the UK, such as Southall Black Sisters, Karma Nirvana, and various other ones who work on those sort of cases. But if you feel that you're going to be taken to another country for abuse to get worse, or for you to be forcefully married to somebody who you know, against your will, there is what I call the teaspoon trick, which is where you basically add a teaspoon into your clothing, a small teaspoon. So when you go through the airport security checks, it will trigger the alarms. And the airport staff are trained to recognise that as being a distress call. So that's your opportunity to actually say, look, I need to speak to someone in private. They will then sort of take you away on the pretense of a frisk search. And that's your opportunity to say, please help me. I'm suffering with abuse and I'm really scared of going abroad with this family.
Right. Okay. Oh, thank you very much for that. I didn't know about that. So yes, I mean, you can put your details and everything if anyone needs to contact you in the comments part below. But Seema, I just want to say thank you so much for sharing your information with us. And I hope that, you know, well, I know that it will help somebody out there that may be suffering from domestic abuse. But we'll talk anyway.
Sure, definitely.
Okay, cheers. Thanks for that. Take care.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
You're welcome. Bye.
Bye.
Okay.